My name is Chuck Michel. I'm an attorney with Michel and Associates. We're a law firm down in Los Angeles and we specialize in environmental law and firearms law. And we often counsel nonprofit corporations and companies on the impact of lead on the environment and on lead remediation procedures. I'm here today on behalf of a coalition, a consortium of a number of different clients, including gun and hunting clubs, associations, nonprofit corporations, and a whole lot of individuals affected by, or potentially affected by, this issue. For the last many months, and particularly in the last couple of months, we've done a lot of work trying to pull together documents and raw data and communications between the Condor recovery team to try and get some information in front of the Commission so that you can use it to make an informed decision. That's become sort of an overwhelming project, and frankly there's still a lot of information that we'd still like to get, consider, and report back on. But in the meantime, we have created a database of tens of thousands of previously unreleased documents that we've shared with scientists and interested parties. And today I'm here primarily just to introduce three more speakers that are going to talk about some of the things that came out of that research in those documents. So we've done sort of a coordinated presentation to try and save time and be sort of get to the point. I know that we had asked for a lot more time, so we've kind of coordinated this so that we hope we can get to the point more quickly. We have each of those speakers and others have submitted written reports, and they should be in the record for your consideration. So I hope that we'll call those speakers in the order that they were submitted. The first speaker will be Anthony Canales. He's a researcher and a quality control manager, and he's probably spent more time poring over the documents that have been produced over the last few years than anybody else. He'll discuss some of the information we found in those documents, and again, he submitted a written report. Then Dr. Eric Randage is going to speak. Dr. Randage is a PhD in metallurgy and materials science, and among other things, has worked with Livermore Laboratory doing classified federal reports on a number of issues, including lead issues. He works as a materials scientist specializing in forensic metallurgy, failure analysis, and advanced materials science. His primary focus these days is on the ethical forensic interpretation of comparative bullet lead analysis. And one of the things Dr. Randage is well known for is causing the FBI to acknowledge flaws in their scientific methods of bullet lead analysis and to abandon the FBI's claims that lead compositional analysis could be used to identify specific ammunition batches and then subsequently used to prosecute suspects. Dr. Randage, in fact, was cited by the Church study, which I'm sure the Church report, I'm sure everyone knows, is probably the biggest document being used to try and justify this proposal. And he'll show how the Church study claim that lead isotopes can be used as fingerprints for lead ammunition is false and scientifically baseless. And our last speaker in our sequence will be Dr. Don Saba. Dr. Saba is a chemist and a medical and biotechnology scientist specializing in the development of human and veterinary diagnostics and therapeutics. Dr. Saba has published a peer-reviewed analysis on the flaws in the Church report, and that study is in the record. And Dr. Saba will speak today to correct some of the misinformation in the Church study, and I'll let him address those specific things. So I would point out in closing that this agenda item is on the agenda today not because of any particular of the usual process. It's here because it's had to be put on the agenda as part of the settlement of a lawsuit, and that's not really a good reason to be considering this policy. And I'd ask that the Commission follow Fish and Game staff recommendation of no action on behalf of my clients. Thank you.
The next speakers have time ceded to them. We have Anthony Canales, followed by Dr. Eric Radich, followed by Don Saba. So, Mr. Canales, go ahead.
I'm sorry, is this the proper? And I'll leave my PowerPoint up. My name is Anthony Canales. I'm a researcher working with Michel and Associates on this particular issue. I'm here in favor of the no change option in opposition to options 1 and 2. Related to the ban on lead shot. The goals of the presentation, I briefly want to review some of the key items that we've already submitted to the public record. We're going to introduce 2 new items today, and I believe this will demonstrate that significant information has not been released to the Commission or to the public. So far what we've found and submitted to you for your review in these various binders is a number of documents that show that the science is not firm, the science is not sound, and in this case, these are discussions within the Condor recovery team. We're also covering, this was information brought about in the last hearing. We're talking about the toxicity issues related to so-called non-toxic materials, tungsten, copper, certain amount of bismuth, and of course there's a potential fire hazard for steel. And what we're finding out is that Condor mortality related to lead has been overstated, and I think some of the other speakers will touch on some of these issues in a more direct manner. The 2 pieces of evidence we're going to talk about today, these are in your binders. You can see them by their Bates numbers, which is how we're identifying them. One is an email statement to Mr. Bob Stafford by Joseph Brandt, who is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist, answering CEQA questions related to the Chimeneas project, where they're trying to bring in feeding sites to the Chimeneas Rancho. The other statement is from Joe Burnett, who is a biologist with the Ventana Wildlife Society. In this case, he's discussing about the problems with DDE, which I'm sure some of the commissioners will be very familiar with. In the case with Mr. Brandt, basically in a nutshell, they want to bring in feeding or proffered food sites into the Chimeneas area in the Carrizo Plain. And he asked a question, do you anticipate that there will be any issues since we do not restrict the use of lead for upland game hunting? This was in October of last year. It's very current. Mr. Brandt's response, my immediate response is no, but I'm going to follow up on this with some program partners. My thinking as it relates to upland game hunting is that there is currently no evidence indicating that this presents any threat to condors. Given the small likelihood that condors will locate animals of this size and not recovered in a hunting situation, I don't think there is much cause for concern. A little bit of a cost-benefit analysis there at the end. In the case of Mr. Burnett's letter, this is January of 2009. He's talking about the problems with DDE. They've been investigating DDE contamination of shells since 2006 in the modern era, but your binders will show significant history is in possession of the Department of Fish and Game related to DDE contamination from the 1970s and 80s. This is a very old problem and potentially one that should have been adjusted for when they did site selection. Mr. Burnett says the DDE issue is fairly cut and dry. Doesn't seem to be arguable there. Based on the data we have gathered thus far, we know it will keep us from achieving our condor recovery goal in Big Sur. Now, from the recent blood lead discussions, you'll know that the central flock consists both of Big Sur and pinnacles. Anything that threatens Big Sur threatens pinnacles, and to a certain degree threatens birds from hopper that rotate back and forth north and south. Conclusion. Up until now, information has been kept from the public and potentially from the Commission. Given the large number of documents that we're still waiting for, I believe we're going to find more of this. Stuff that you folks were not aware of. Folks the public was not made aware of. My recommendation is wait, get the facts, do the studies. CEQA is a requirement. Even with ESA, these kinds of studies are a requirement. Let them get done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canales. For the record, I want to indicate that Michel and Associates has sent the Commission office rather significant amount of information, and we have filed that information and forwarded it to the Commissioners, and the Commissioners have been presented with all the information that has come into our office. So we have Dr. Eric Randich, followed by Dr. Don Saba, followed by Virginia Hanley. Sir, go ahead. You have 4 minutes.
My name is Eric Randish, and I've been retained by Michel and Associates to do an independent and objective scientific review of the Church paper that makes the conclusion that ammunition is the principal source of lead exposure for the condors. I'm a metallurgist, so I approach this from an industrial lead standpoint and from an isotope ratio standpoint. And what could we do with these tools? Can I have my slides up there, please? Let's see. The key points that I'd like to bring up today are several, and they're outlined in my report, that the lead used for ammunition can't really be distinguished from the lead that's used in any other lead-containing product. That includes fishing sinkers, lead wheel weights, brass, Most of the brasses out there are free machining brasses that for plumbing parts and screws, they contain 0.5% to 7% lead. Secondly, industrial lead has a much greater isotope ratio range than that shown by the church. They used a very selected and small portion of the data to represent the ammunition. Church also used incomplete environmental background data from their own references. And further, they ignored one of their references on lead ammunition. Isotope ratios alone cannot be used to address the likelihood that one lead source is the principal source or preferred source over another lead source. The forensic community does not use isotope ratios in courts of law for good reason. It can only be used to exclude and say they didn't come from the same lead source. But there's so many lead sources that have the same isotope ratio that you can't use it in a court of law. This is the figure 1 from the church article, which summarizes what they've done. They plot the level of the blood, or the level of the lead in the Condor blood here versus the isotope ratio for the 207, 206. They have environmental lead at a relatively high number, 0.83, 0.84. We'll call it 83, 84. And their 19 bullets are over here at the 80 to 82 level. They draw a line and say, hey, as the blood level goes up, it approaches this low ammunition cluster over here from this high cluster over here. But the question that I came upon was, is this an accurate representation? And the answer is no. The actual ranges for industrial lead, if one looks into the forensic literature and the leaded gas industry, anything you'd like, look at the numbers here. Here's the forensic literature for ammunition. 76 to 86, 79 to 91, 85 to 103, 83 to 94. Look at 30 years of leaded gasoline. This is the tetraethyl lead that comes from the same lead smelters that make the ammunition. 81 to 86. You can't tell ammunition lead from any other lead coming from the same smelter. So why did Church use only 80 to 82 for the ammunition rather than true range? I don't know. If you look at the whole range for ammunition that's available in California today, it goes from 910 to 760. This whole range, not just this little cluster. So that's the real range over here. Again, if we look at the data for background from their reference Errol presented 15 data points, not just the 2 that Church used. Look at the numbers for 78 for the water, 77 to 80 for soil, whole rocks, 81 to 82. If you look at that and use the real environmental background data, it's this red line that's way off scale down here. So now we're faced with drawing a line from this cluster of data to this cluster of data, and you can see that you cannot draw a curvilinear line like this. It makes no sense. You could draw a line going up, going down, or straight across because it all overlaps. In other words, they used very selected information from their references. They did not give an accurate representation of their own references, and that's unforgivable. In summary, the actual data, and you can read this in reports of background environmental lead and industrial leads, are much larger than reported by Church. They do completely overlap, and rightly so. In fact, the 2 background data points they used were industrial lead caused, and that's explained in the Errol paper itself. If you do use complete and representative data, you cannot support the Church mathematical model, and you cannot support their conclusion that it's the principal source. It's just not defendable. It's an untenable conclusion, gentlemen. Thank you.
Doctor, just one question. You said you were hired by a law firm to do an independent and objective review of a peer-reviewed paper. Can you tell us where your rebuttal was published and what peer-reviewed journal you published your rebuttal?
I have not published it yet. I was employed about, it's August, I was employed in the middle of July. This was basically a 2.5-week effort. We do plan to publish in the future, but yeah, this was just a recent.
I hope when you do publish in a peer-reviewed journal that you'll send us a copy of that paper.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Okay, we have Dr. Don Saba, who has time ceded to him. He'll have 4 minutes, followed by Virginia Hanley, followed by Damon Nagami. Sorry if I got that name wrong. Dr. Saba?
Could I have my slides put up? Good afternoon. It's been 2 years since I last stood before you, and it's been 2 years since Commissioner Sutton challenged me to publish my data and get it peer-reviewed. I did exactly that. I published my reservations about the church paper. They were peer-reviewed, and they were accepted. They were published in the year 2008 of February, and that data has been submitted. That publication has been submitted. You all have seen it. Today I'd like to revisit the church paper and to talk about some critical omissions of data in that paper. These omissions are so critical that they virtually destroy the basic premise of that paper. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, the omission of data that I'm referring to here, I've got two quotations here. Notice now the church paper was published in 2006. I'm referring here to an email between Dr. Robert Riseborough and Dr. Don Smith. These are the authors of the church paper. An email made in December of 2004, and here's another report by one of the Robert Riseborough in 2005. Here we say, the email says, we put together a spreadsheet with all the information we have about the birds for which we have blood isotope ratios. First, we might exclude the two samples with ratios higher than either background or ammunition, attributing them to some other source. Subsequently, Dr. Riseborough says, for the other two suspected lead deaths, number 175 and number 181, the ratios were 0.89 and 0.86 respectively. Regarding both of these birds, Dr. Riseborough wrote that those values were much higher than those recorded in the ammunition samples, and that in each case, lead exposure cannot be attributed to an ammunition source. So, excuse me, I shouldn't have done that so fast. So what we're talking about here is this. Two birds are suspected to have died from lead. These deaths cannot be attributed to lead, and they're talking about excluding this data from the church report. How can this be? Well, here is the critical data that is included in the church report. We don't find this data included here. And here we have the church report in all its glory. And here again, to recap, these green dots are condors in captivity. They have an isotopic ratio in this range of 830 to 835. The basic premise of the church paper is that as you release condors into the wild, they begin to accumulate lead, as you can see here going to the right. And the premise is that these yellow triangles here represent the blood lead of these condors. As they are released and they begin to accumulate lead, the premise is that as the condors begin to accumulate lead, their blood isotopic ratios begin to approach that of ammunition. That's the linchpin right there. And the problem is right here. If you include the omitted data is way off scale from the church paper. Here's 0.86 for one dead condor. Here's 0.89 for another dead condor. These dead condors have blood lead concentrations far in excess of the church data. Remember, these church birds here were living birds in the wild. These birds are dead. They have really high concentrations of lead in their blood. They have really high isotopic ratios, well beyond the reported ammunition values in the church paper. Had these two pieces of data been revealed when the church paper was published, it would have been rejected. Had these two pieces of data been reported to you when these church authors stood before you, they would have never been able to make the conclusion that ammunition is the principal source of lead in the blood of condors. And so I just, in summary, want to say that we really have to be careful when we look at data presented to us. This is a case where data was excluded, absolutely critical data, and it is so misleading that this paper simply cannot be relied upon. This paper is meaningless. And I just want to say one final thing. I appreciate your allowing me to say this. That I'm not trying to say that a person should be castigated for this or should be feel embarrassed about this. This is a very complicated issue. In order to be conversant in this issue, a person has to have expertise in chemistry. A person has to have expertise in metallurgy. A person has to have expertise in biology. And a person has to have expertise in forensic sciences. Very few people have that level of expertise. And so it's understandable that someone would make a mistake like this. thank you for indulging. If there are any questions, I'd certainly be willing to answer anything. Thank you.